sang this song to me. There was a message in its melody, sweetest lyrics that I ever heard. There's a message in the songs of birds. Tomorrow is another day. Living is the only way tomorrow's gonna ever come. Listen to the words of the song. Everything's gonna be alright. Everything is gonna be
Good evening to all of you who are listening to this show right now, and another hello to those of you who will be listening to it later. I'm Stephanie Wilson-Coleman. I'm known as the Empowerment Doctor, and you are listening to a Sip of Inspiration podcast. Here is where we bring you information that will help you to improve your lives, will inform you about different techniques, and hopefully empower you to do the things necessary so that you too can live the life that you dream about. A little housekeeping. If you're watching this show now, you're watching it on my personal Facebook page, which is Empower DR. You can see it later on Empowerment Doctor, because that's my page also, but you're not watching it live there. Okay. And go out to my website, champagneconnection.com, and that's champagne like the liquor, not the city, champagneconnection.com. You can see it there. And while you're there, pick up a little merchandise too. As I always say, one day I'm going to surprise you guys and wear some on the show, but today's not this day. Okay, but thank you for joining me. We are going to have a blast as usual. So joining me today is Dr. Lanze Thompson. Okay, let me tell you, he has a new book out called Black Wounds, but this book, for as powerful it is, you guys have got to go check out his author page on Amazon. You can Google him and find out everything, but he has an impressive number of books. This Angel Chronicles Series that he does is absolutely fabulous. So I am so happy to have you today. So thank you for joining us, and tell us about yourself.
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate the invitation to be here and to share this segment with you. So basically, I'm originally from Boston, born and raised, and went to school in Maine at Colby College, did my undergraduate there in economics, came back to Boston afterwards and did my MBA at Boston College, majoring in finance and strategy. And then I went on to do my doctorate at Pace University in Manhattan, concentrating in international business and global strategy. So my career has basically been 30 plus years, all in corporate America. So I've worked at some of the largest Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies in the world, such as Philip Morris, such as Time Warner, Ford Motor Company, Con Edison, Alcoa, CNN, Georgia Lottery, which is not a international company, but it's certainly like the 5th or 6th largest lottery in the world, so very, very big. And now I'm at Clark Atlanta University. So I transitioned into higher ed about 4 years ago. And there were people that found that as an odd move. But when they looked at my background and looked at some of the things that I did, I really saw that I was really positioning myself for higher ed over my career. So I had taught in the doctorate program and in the MBA program for about 5 or 6 years. And I was on the board of directors for Clayton State University and for the business school. So I kind of had a toe in the higher ed world. But when this opportunity came along, it allowed me to kind of jump in full body. And it was kind of a win-win, where they were looking for someone who could kind of bring that business acumen to the university, to higher ed, but someone who could also appreciate the nonprofit mission of really investing in and trying to help grow our next generation of leaders. And particularly, with Clark Atlanta University being an HBCU, that was also very important to me, because even though I didn't go to an HBCU, the backgrounds of these students is very much my background, where I came from, and the the kind of economic households that I had to grow up in. So I could definitely relate to where they were coming from, But now with this point in my career, I could kind of have a sense of how to help them get to where I think they want to go with their own ambitions.
Oh, that's fantastic. So when you transitioned into Clark Atlanta, is it everything you thought about or you thought it would be, or everything we've heard about? Because it's an impressive school.
The school itself is very impressive. It's very distinguished. The thing that I was very impressed with is its history. And I'm a real history buff, even though I'm in finance and in business. But I really appreciate history. So you look at Clark Atlanta University, and actually it's a consolidation of two very strong historical schools, Clark College and Atlanta University. And one was formed in 1865 and the other in 1869. So when I was looking at the university and I started going back into its history, that struck me as very impressive, because as we know in this country, the Civil War ended in 1865. So right after the Civil War ended, one of the first things that we did as a community, as a people, was to form institutions that we could then start to aspire to higher education. Now, of course, the slaves were denied the opportunity to read and write and to be educated, and many of them still snuck to do it, but it was illegal. So when we were free, one of the first things that we did all across this country was set up institutions of our own learning and higher ed and teaching. So that history impressed me that was one of the first things we did at this university. But then you continue on and you see that this is where W.E.B. Du Bois went to school, and he taught here. And so, just walking the halls of the grounds of someone of that magnitude and that type of impact, certainly in our history. And then we fast forward all the way into Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Mm-hmm. And so, he's right across the lawn, at Morehouse College. And then, I'm right at the heart of the civil rights movement. With Dr. Ralph Abernathy and Andrew Young and all the student leaders who came up through that time period, and they traveled these roads in these halls that I'm now walking in. So that was very impressive, that you could feel their spirit, and you have a sense of kind of pride and a sense of, I think, feeling like the baton is passed to you now to keep this institution going. It's meant a lot to a lot of people over these years. And now under my stewardship, I take it very seriously that I want to leave it in a better place than it was when I joined this university.
Yes, and I'm sure you will do just that. So let's talk about your books, your newest book, Black Wounds. And we're going to talk about the other books too, because I think I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about Angel Chronicles.
Okay.
But let's talk about Black Wounds. So what was going on that made you think that I need to write this book? So, because I know sometimes the books, they talk to you, and it's born inside of you and you have to get it out on paper. So what was going on that led to the creation of this book?
Yeah, and that's a great way to describe it, because this was a book that I was kind of running from, hoping that it was not necessary to write. And its early genesis was, a college thesis that I did back at Colby College in my economic thesis. I did a book on the progress of Black America. So I was looking at since the civil rights movement and the legislation in the 60s, I was looking at how much progress had we made across a number of different metrics, employment, equal pay, healthcare, bank loans, home ownership, and so forth. And I thought this was going to be a good news story. And I was dismayed to see that we had not made a lot of real progress. We made relative progress, but not real progress in terms of closing the gaps that existed at the time that this legislation was put in place. And 30 years later, we had only kind of crawled along to make some very small progress. So I was dismayed at that. But I turned in the paper, did my assignment, and graduated, and then went on to my business career. And so I spent all this time working on my career, my family, my own personal ambitions, and so forth, and kind of put that aside. And I led myself to believe that, we're doing okay as a people. We're moving forward. I myself can see myself moving up in corporate America, even though many times I was either the first Black manager or executive, or the only Black manager or executive. And as I said, I work for some very large global companies, some companies very successful, companies that have been around for many, many years, in some cases over 100 years. And so, I started to dawn on me, well, companies that have been around that long, why am I the only or the first, Black manager? So I those things started to gnaw at me, but I still continued on my way. And then, I started to see some rumblings, with some movements that were happening, with some, especially around prison reform and things like that. So it got my attention again. But then Barack Obama got elected, and I worked at CNN at the time. So I was really involved in the coverage and really understanding his story and his journey and the excitement around that. And it was a good news story, but it also kind of made you get a false sense of, we've come a long, long way. Otherwise, this could not have happened. So I bought into that. But then somewhere around 2012, I started to see one high profile case after another of a young Black person being physically abused or oppressed by the police. So whether it was Trayvon Martin or Breonna Taylor or Eric Garner, and then eventually, culminating, with the ultimate one with George Floyd. So I could not turn a blind eye to that. I said, you know what, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in this country, and there's still people who need to stand up and call out the injustices that we see and speak up for those who are just the recipient of all this injustice and inequality. So even though I may have been moving along well in my career, and not that there weren't barriers and challenges and hurdles that I had to overcome, but I just figured that was part of the landscape and I would do that. But when I started looking back at other people and seeing the challenges and barriers that were put in their place just for everyday living, not to progress to be a senior VP or CFO, but just to have a basic job that put food on their table and clothes on their back, I said, that's not right. So this book came back to me. It said, you know what, we are, as a people, we are hurting. And even those who are successful, the things that we've had to go through have caused us to have these wounds and these scars and these things that we carry with us. And many times, because we're a very proud people, we carry them in silence, and they just fester and they grow, and we don't even characterize them as wounds. We characterize them as frustration or disappointment or disillusionment or disenfranchisement. But they're really things that are happening and hurting us in our spirit that's keeping us from flying to the heights of our ability and our ambitions and pursuing the dreams and goals that we were meant to pursue. So I said this book is still needed. It's still important to point out these things that are still happening even today in this society. But I wanted to balance that with, because in my research, I saw, and again, being a student of history, that despite these challenges, despite these barriers that were put in our way, we have still accomplished, we have still achieved things well beyond what anyone should have expected. So I wanted to highlight the triumphs that we were able to still accomplish as a people, in spite of the challenges that were always put in front of us.
So as you were doing your research, did you find that there were different challenges for different decades, or they're the same challenges? Are we still fighting the same things? Did they change? And we just, because now that you say that, you're right, we do express it as disappointments and all of that instead of just real wounds. Because I know in my own corporate career, there were, at some point, a lot of times I was the only one, and I couldn't figure out why we were still having the only one,
Yeah.
And I didn't think about it. You're right. We do say, oh, disappointments hurts, but they're actually wounds.
Yeah. And to answer your question, that was one of the things that was the most eye-opening and disappointing, was that many of these issues that we are talking about today were issues going back to the 1920s, the 1930s and 40s, such as voting rights. We're still trying to get a Voting Right Act passed. And I started asking the question, I'm an American citizen born here in this country, both parents born here in this country. So why am I already not protected under the US Constitution to have voting rights? Why is there a special act for Black Americans to have this act that has to get reaffirmed every so many years?
And if it's not reaffirmed, then we suddenly somehow they create ways for us to lose the right to vote, right?
Right. So why is that even an issue?
Right.
So an immigrant from Europe can come here today and have a child, and that child has more rights under the Constitution as far as voting than me as a Black person who was born here and whose ancestors have sweated and died here. So that's one thing. So why are we still fighting voting rights, right? And then putting up barriers and hurdles, and we're seeing this now after the 2020 election, where almost over 40 states or so have put in legislation that's going to make it harder for certainly minorities and people of color to vote. And that's not intentional. That goes back to, back in the early, after Reconstruction, when they put up these poll taxes and these literacy tests and so forth, again, aimed at keeping you from participating in the democratic process of voting. So that's still a battle we're fighting today. Anti-lynching, that should be a no-brainer. It should be illegal to hang someone up and lynch them as a vigilante act of mob justice. There was an anti-lynching bill first proposed in 1920, another in 1930, and then again it got reignited again at the killing of Emmett Till. We just had another the anti-lynching Emmett Till anti-lynching bill that was proposed about a year or so ago, and it has still not passed. So we're talking almost 100 years of the American democratic system not able to pass a bill that says it is illegal to lynch a person. So again, these items or these issues just continue from year to year and decade to decade. Equal pay. For the most part, we're still making almost 2/3 of what the mainstream white America makes. And I find that interesting because it says at the founding of this country, the Constitution, that Blacks were property and we were worth 2/3 the value of a white man. So this is going back to late 1700s, and fast forward to today, and we're almost still at that 2/3 of value in terms of our pay scales. Home ownership and bank loans. So I can go on and on and on. So the issues are not new. The challenges that are there and how we are forced to have to confront them or deal with them it gets more creative, and how they get either covered up or how we are made to believe that it's not the system, it's you as an individual. Maybe you just didn't qualify for this loan, or maybe we're offering you this lower price for your house versus the house next door to you where a white person lives, not because of anything with the color of your skin, just that house next door is better than yours. But then when they run a test, and you've seen these on ABC and other undercover programs, they take that same Black person out of the house, put a white couple in the house, and immediately the house goes up by almost 1/3 in value. So we've seen test after test, issue after issue, that we're still fighting the same battles that were put before us over 100 years ago.
So if you could create a call to action based upon what you have found that's still going on, what would that call to action for us to be? Because if we don't do something, then nothing gets changed.
Right.
And it is a long-term fight, as you just reminded us, because you're right, we've been having this voting rights. I mean, they did it in 1865.
Right.
And then they undid it, and then we had to do it again. And when I was small and King was talking about the Voting Rights Act, they acted like this was something brand new. It's like, no, didn't you read history? They did it in 1865 and they take it back. This is a second or third time around. So what would be the call of action? What things do we that we need to pay attention to, and maybe how do we become actors of this? Because a lot of people now, don't march. They just don't have, we don't have that in us anymore, I guess. I don't know what happened to that, but there are other powerful things that we can do to exact change. So what would you recommend?
Well, I think it starts with, and my eyes were open to this in the last maybe 5 or 6 years, because I always thought of politics and voting kind of on the national scale with senators and presidents.
Yeah.
But I'm realizing now that what affects our everyday life is the local community, school boards and mayors and city councils, commissioners and things of that nature that affect your everyday community, and the things that make the decisions around, whose streets gets plowed first, and which schools get new books versus used books, and which ones get investments in new technology for keeping up with the changing emerging technology with Wi-Fi and other types of devices to be able to engage in those technologies. So those decisions are made at the local level. Presidents and senators and even maybe congressional men and women, they don't get, maybe Congress gets a little closer to that, but some of the other politics doesn't get us close to that. So what I realize is that we have to take our politics to more of a local level versus just the national level. And a lot of times you hear that when there's a major election, they're always trying to get out the vote, get the black vote out. And we talk about, well, we'll come out and we'll vote for president, and then even then, depending on who the candidate is, but then we won't vote for all these other local elections and who these judges are and who these sheriffs are, who run the judicial system and the court system and the prison systems. So those are the things that are affecting the quality of our life, more so than who sits in the White House. So we got to get more active in those things and participate in them on a regular, consistent basis. So that's one thing. I think the other thing is we have to be more demanding when we talk about, the buzzword now is DE&I, diversity, equity, inclusion.
And inclusion. Mm-hmm.
Well, they were talking about that when I joined the workforce.
I was just saying, that's not new, right?
Right. They called it a different name, right? And even, it was Workforce 2000, and they just call it different names over the years. But what I've come to believe, and even in some of my research, what I've come to see is that this country has put billions and billions of dollars of investment in what they call DE&I initiatives. But yet, when you look at the actual results, you don't see a materially improvement in the representation of Blacks in management, middle management, and certainly not at the senior level. And now you're seeing, kind of an awakening that we need to get a Black on the board. But even then, it's still well underrepresented in terms of what we make up as a percentage of the population in this country. So really holding these companies accountable and not falling for the shiny propaganda, public relations, where they buy their diversity awards and they go to dinners and they sponsor a table. They encourage their employees to come out and have a volunteer day where they come and clean up an empty lot in the ghetto. No, we need real, that's all fine and well, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. We need real jobs. We need real people being hired into these companies at meaningful levels, and not just hiring them in meaningful levels, but really having a path towards success and promotion and development and being able to be seen as future leaders of these companies. And not just tokenism, and as I said, I've been in corporate America for over 30 years. And in many of those positions, I was the one or the only Black American. And I have to believe that there's many more talented people that could have been equal to the level or above my level. And when I think about this, I think about the talent. A company, when they're looking at their talent, they don't say, well, we got 5 white guys who can handle this position or can be leaders in this company. We only want to pick one of them. They want all 5 of them. You want the best players on your team, no matter how many there are. But when it comes to Black talent, it seems like there's a limit, one and we're done, and now everyone should be satisfied that we check that box off. And we're not boxes to be checked off. We're people who have real dreams, ambitions, who have worked hard, and in many cases worked harder, because we have the stigma that if we don't work harder, then people think that we're not working as hard as our counterparts. And many times we have more credentials, not less. And we see people who get promoted past us or who become our bosses, and you get frustrated. And you either leave that company and move somewhere else, and then that becomes a mark against you because you don't have stability. You keep leaving companies every 3 years.
Right.
Well, I'm leaving for a reason because I don't see upward mobility and opportunity, but that gets used against you. Or you stay and you get frustrated and you just lose your ambition. You just stay and you go through the motions that this is a paycheck, as opposed to a place that I can really fly and really contribute my full potential to this company. So we need to have more demand on that. We need to really insist on equal pay. The work that we do, the expectations that we do, that we're being held to, is no less, and we're no less accountable for the work and for the outcomes. And I was looking at this research that I was seeing maybe a couple of weeks ago, and it compared Black managers and executives in companies where they had P&L responsibilities, and it compared them to their white counterparts who also had P&L responsibilities. And the results of the Black managers and executives were equal, if not greater, performance and outcomes than their white counterparts. So the purpose of this study was to say that the performance of Black managers and leaders is just as effective as their white counterparts. But yet, when you look at who is being promoted and who is being compensated, who is being recognized, and who is being rewarded, these Black managers had been in these positions much longer and had seen people who came in after them or their underlings being promoted, who are now their bosses. And so again, we talk about wounds. That's a type of wound where psychologically it just demoralizes you and it demotivates you, or you have to fight hard to maintain your motivation, just to put on your game face to go back out there tomorrow and do it again, knowing that you're up against these injustices.
And I would say that some of us may be making the same, but check the bonuses. So, because that's the part you don't see. I mean, the salary structure may reward everyone equally, but they play some games with those bonuses
and in stock options.
And in stock options, right. You may make the same base salary, but your bonus may have been 5,000. They're giving 20, 25,000 stock options. Yes, it is a huge difference in pay.
Exactly. And I think the other thing is, we have to start building generational wealth. We have to, I saw the numbers, and I think they probably haven't changed much, but the average net worth in the Black household is about $6,000 to $7,000.
Mm-hmm.
The average net worth for a white household was like almost $120,000. Mm-hmm. That's just huge. That's just a gap that in your lifetime you can almost not expect to close. And the interesting thing that I found was when you look at it at different education levels, it does not matter. The white person with a high school degree has as much of a higher wealth and net worth as an educated Black person with a master's degree. So we follow this, education is the equalizer, the great equalizer. Again, it's not bearing out that way. And I don't think these things are accidental. I don't think these things are random. It's just too pervasive and it's too persistent for it not to be very well coordinated.
Oh, they're very well coordinated. I remember the study, even why Jamal can't get a job, and then the one about the equal pay. I graduated, I got an MBA from University of Chicago, and they participated in one of those. And we were informed in that book that a white male with a high school education would make more money going in entry level than me. It's like, yeah, it's like, gosh. So, and then we are, as a group of people, left thinking, and I know we have these conversations where we're trying to figure out what's wrong, trying to get the best resume, trying to make sure we're volunteering for every project ever so we have great experience and getting on there, taking classes on how to interview, how to answer that question. And you're so incredibly prepared, and then you don't get the position, and then you look later and find out a white male got it, and then you look at his background and he's half as qualified. It's like, right. But you're right. We just call it a hurt, not a wound, when it really is a wound.
Yeah. And I use that term because this book is meant to be real provocative. It's meant to be in your face. It's meant to rip off the Band-Aid. It's meant to create a dialogue, but a dialogue that's not meant to try and make people feel comfortable or not face the rawness and the reality of the situations that Black Americans are facing. And someone said, well, aren't you afraid of hurting people's feelings? I said, well, you know what? When this country is afraid of offending Blacks and hurting our feelings and being concerned about killing our youth, then I'll be concerned about my words hurting their feelings. So
my mother said, don't wear your feelings on your sleeve. It's not a good place for it. So I'm like you. It's like, take them off your sleeve. It'll be okay.
Yeah. And it's meant to really challenge, just to get people who know this plight of Black Americans, because they walk this plight, to let them know there's a voice that hears them and that you're not alone and you're not crazy, you're not making this up. But those who don't know, many of our white counterparts and others who, and I do believe there's a group who are just innocently naive, who just don't know. They just haven't lived this life and haven't really had these kind of conversations, and they're just whether innocently naive or conveniently naive, but here's an opportunity for you to get educated. And then those who will say, yes, I know all this and I can care less. I know that we discriminate. I know that you don't get the opportunities. I know that you're denied bank loans. I know that you're not given opportunities of equal pay or opportunities to get promoted and advancement, but I don't care. And I talk about those folks in this book too, because we have to face reality of what we're up against. Those who are truly influenceable, who we can garner as allies to help us if they can just understand the seriousness and the concerns that we have. But those who understand it and don't care, and we still have to live in the world with them as well. So how do we deal with those folks?
Right. So because they're ignoring all of the data, and I've just finished reading some of the books that the 1619 Project and some of those. So and that just proves that the data is out there. Not only is it out there, I mean, the bill for reparations has been in Congress for nearly 30 years. So it's not a new conversation.
Right.
It's just that they choose to ignore it.
Right. And look at what they're not only just ignoring it, they're proactively going out to quell it from being taught or from it being discussed in classrooms, which I found very interesting, because education is supposed to be where you bring thoughts and ideas and paradigms, and you debate them and you discuss them and you broaden your minds, and then you form your opinions on things that that make sense and relate to you. But they're saying we're going to keep this out of American learning. And first of all, I find it interesting because they're not even in American learning. Right. We don't even teach 1619 in our schools, certainly in our elementary schools.
That's what I thought. We don't teach it anyway. Where do you keep it?
What are you talking
about?
Where
are you taking it from? Yeah.
Right. It's taught in law school, right? So to make so they're being proactive, again, creating this boogeyman that if you talk about race and you talk about the realities of what Blacks have gone through and have to live with in this country, then you are accusing us of something. You're trying to manipulate the minds of our children. You're trying to teach white self-hate, and we can't allow that. But we can allow for the status quo to watch your kids get killed in the street, to watch your sons and husbands and daughters get thrown in jail for minor offenses that turn into 5, 10, 15-year sentences. We're comfortable with watching the disparity in healthcare with the mortality rates of Black births versus white births even our life expectancy being almost 10 years less. But we're comfortable with those things being present in our society, but we're not comfortable with you telling the history of how this country was started.
And you're right. One thing I find interesting even about the stand on that is people are reading it anyway. Right. People are talking about it anyway. People love to read what they can't read, what's banned. So maybe, people love that. Like, it's banned. Oh, I got to read it today, right?
Right.
And even in my feed, I have people saying, well, they banned it. I guess I must read. I got to read it, right? So we're not going to stop the fight. We're going to keep on, and they're going to read it. And there will be some change, but I really like your point about we've got to start local. That's what affects our lives immediately. And I think that going back to that, I think people don't really realize that we elect the sheriffs and the mayors who hire the policemen who kill us, who hire the firemen who don't come and help us when we have a fire. We elect them. So we need to actually become more educated about that person that's running. And I know I was guilty a while back where you just go and check a block, but then when I started researching the people in advance, and it's like, no, I don't want them. It's like, I voted for them the last time. What was I thinking? I wasn't. I don't want them now,
Right.
So how should people start to get involved in local politics? Because that's one thing I don't think people know. And before, you could go to a city council, and I don't think people realize now that most of the city council meetings now, if they're not open back, you can do Zoom, and all you have to do is know when it is, and it's on your mayor's page.
Right. And I think that you're making a great point, and that's really what it is, just being engaged. So just really looking up who are your representatives today. What's their names, what's their affiliation, party affiliation, what's their stances on certain issues, how have they voted on certain issues, certainly that affects you in ones that you might be more sensitive to in your community, and do your research. Just like, I played sports my whole life, and we would go out and we would scout the team that we're going to play against, right? So we would know what we're up against, right, before game day. So I think you have to do this research prior to an election. So as you just said, that's a person who stands for things or who has represented things that doesn't align with my own values or my own positions. So I know now that I'm not going to vote for that person again blindly by just checking off the box. So doing our own homework on who these folks are, what they stand for, and then looking at when the next elections are. So just having a calendar of when the elections are, because a lot of times these elections come up and someone says, oh, there's election next Tuesday. I didn't know they were electing a new school board representative or a new city council, because we pay attention to, maybe because it gets exposed on the news, but we pay attention to the big elections. But these local ones, they just kind of happen throughout. So just understanding in our own community when these things are happening, who these folks are, when the election is happening, and then participate. But then, as you just said, understanding when the meetings are. So when they're discussing zoning, something as simple as zoning, when they'll build a prison in your neighborhood versus a neighborhood that has told them absolutely not, because those folks are showing up at the meetings, they're putting up opposition, they're letting you know that you're not going to deteriorate the home values in our community by putting up whether it's a prison or whether it's a dump or whatever it is. We just turn around and we got a building there and we didn't know where it came from. So just being active in the meetings and understanding what's going to affect our community and our lifestyle and our children. Changing the schools, where they put a new school in one area or they combine two schools together because maybe for occupancy or resources or whatever. And all of a sudden our children, instead of going to a school that's maybe a half mile down the street, are now going to a school 5, 6, 7 miles away. So that's a whole different structure for busing, the bus schedule, and when you have to get them out the house ready and picking them up. And it affects and then affects your job, what time you now have to be to work. So all these things affect the quality of your life. So just being informed, educated, and having maintaining a steady engagement in these issues.
I agree. And as much as I hate to admit, I remember when I looked up, it's like, what? They're doing what? I said, oh no, I gotta stop. So we have got to, I know our lives are busy, especially as African Americans, but you've got to make some time to you have to get involved in local politics and start with knowing who the candidates are, who's in office now representing you. And whether you voted for them or not, they represent you. Find out what the issues are and be vocal about those. And now they all have email. And to make it easier, there are apps that you can use to communicate with them and get the messages to them. I know in Illinois, there's one, and then there's the 5 calls that'll not pushing an app, but you can get one, and it has their numbers, their email addresses. It's really easy now.
Right.
More so. So use the computer that we carry around called our phones.
That's right.
To start to be active. And you don't have to be overly vocal or mean, because some people say, oh, I can't speak up. Write a text message to them and tell them what you want, or I don't want this here because that's kind of just, let's start somewhere, and that's a good place to start. That's right.
And I was talking to a colleague a while ago, maybe months and months ago, and I was kind of having this similar conversation, and he's like, oh man, we don't have time for that. That's taking up all my time. I said, well, you're going to invest in what you find as your priority and what you value. He said, well, I don't have time for all that. Then no more than 5 minutes later, he sat there and was telling me about his fantasy football team and all the players that he was going to get. And this guy here who had this number of catches, and this guy here who had this number of tackles, and he was going to trade for this other guy who was on injured reserve, but he was going to come off. I'm saying, you know all this about some fantasy football game, but you don't know this about the community that you live in and that affects your life and your children's life. I said, what's wrong with this picture?
Right. That's right. And we do earn less. That's been proven over and over. And women earn even less, or lesser than men, than Black men. And and not that we have to become more aware of how we allocate the funds we spend too. We've got to stop supporting companies that don't support us, that don't put money back into us. We've just got to stop that. We've got to stop buying fancy things because we need to look good. We've got to start keeping some money, because you mentioned $7,000 versus $125,000. That's not a good place to be.
No, it's not, and it affects you today, but it also affects the legacy of what you're able to leave for your children, your grandchildren, their children. So you're just kind of passing on this low net worth down the line. You're not breaking out that cycle. Right. And you see wealthy individuals, certainly white males, who have crafted ways to leave their inheritance and put up estate funds and trust funds, and now be able to leave money without paying taxes on it. They're thinking already ahead beyond their own lifetime. They're thinking about their grandchildren and great grandchildren, what they're going to leave behind for them. And then these folks get this inheritance, and now they are starting $100,000 ahead of you in the game of life, right?
Right. And they haven't been born yet, guys.
They haven't even been born yet.
Right.
Right. And so this is where some of the disadvantages start, long before our children have even been born, by the decisions and the lack of decisions that we make today on their behalf.
Oh gosh, yes, we still have a lot of work to do, and we have the energy, we've got the drive, we definitely have the education, and as if y'all read, Black women are the most educated people in this country, so we've got all of that. We just have to start looking after ourselves. So I'm right there with you. We've got to start in local politics. So
and what you said on economic power, if the Black American, the gross national product and earnings of Black Americans, if we were our own nation, we would be somewhere around the 7th or 8th largest country in the world.
Yes.
In terms of wealth.
Right.
So even though we are at a great gap and disparity versus white America, versus the rest of the world, we are in a top tier position of wealth that we come in contact with and that we possess at some point in time throughout the year and throughout our life. So making better decisions with that wealth, and as you just said, finding out who we're spending our money with and if their interests is aligned with ours. And I think that's where, these public relations, where these companies talk about DE&I, diversity, equity, inclusion, where they spent money on propaganda and public relations, because they want to be able to tell us a story that they're someone that we should continue spending their money with, our money with. But when you peel back the layers inside the company, you look at who's actually running the company, who's participating in their success, who's being promoted, who's in the position of elevation and decision-making, you don't find many of us there. So they want to keep that kind of behind closed wraps, but they want to tell the public relations story, but they're doing it because they do value our dollar that we spend with them year after year after year.
Yes, just not us, but our dollar. So that dollar is important. So we need to look at where we spend, how we allocate it. So where do we allocate this money? I often tell people, it says, well, how do we get a change? How do we get anybody to change? I said, 98% of the barbecue is bought by barbecue sauce is bought by African Americans. Just don't buy any barbecue sauce this weekend. Kraft will come knocking on your door and asking you, what do you want?
Right, and we have a blueprint on how this works. We go back to the boycott, the bus boycott, back in the 50s, where they stopped riding the bus, shut that bus company down almost in a year.
Right,
and they were willing to change everything that we were asking for, sitting on the front of the bus. You can even drive the bus if you want to. Just come back and give us your money.
That's right. Just give us your money. Right.
We've been shown a blueprint by our ancestors that this really works and has an impact. You hit people in the pocketbook, that's what they value or what gets their attention.
Right. So yeah, the mechanics of writing the book. So when you decided that it's a story that you still needed to tell and it was timely, unfortunately it's still timely, because I'd like to say that we were in a different place. We're not. We just look better, that's all. And there are cameras now, thank God for that, because some of the stuff is finally getting documented. But what was the process that you took in order to put the information together so that you could get the book that would speak to the things that you wanted to speak to, the things that you felt like were important?
Yeah, and that's a great question, because I had to, all my books, I have to really start at what's the right vantage point, right? What angle am I telling the story? What perspective am I telling the story from? So this book was really, my passion for this book was really telling it from, and it's a hybrid of poems and narratives. So my passion for this was really the poems, because the poems I thought spoke to the emotion, spoke to the sense of frustration, the mood, so these things are happening to Black America. So you can watch that as a unbiased, objective, dispassionate observer, and you can see something happening. And okay, you saw the facts of what happened, but I wanted to capture that it happened to us and how did that make us feel?
Okay.
So when this happened to us, when we were brutalized or discriminated against by the police or by the neighborhood, by not being given opportunity or not getting the job promotion, how did that make us feel? And what did that do to us spiritually, from a sense of confidence, from a sense of our morale? So I wanted to capture the feelings to let people understand that we're human and we feel and we hurt, but also we have to find a way to get back up. And that's what we've been doing for 400 something years in this country. Despite this healing, the hurting and wounds, we've also always had to find a way to get back up. So I wanted to tell that emotional mood setting part. But then I wanted to provide narratives, but based on facts and subject matter experts and well-researched narratives. And I did that because, I wrote a poem a while ago, and it was about, kind of some of the disparities that we face as Blacks in this country. And someone read it and they said, well, that's nice, but that's your opinion. So, it was so very easy to dismiss something that was real to me, something that was impactful to me and had made me feel a certain way. And someone else could just say, well, that's your opinion. No one else thinks that way or feels that way. So I wanted to back this book up with research that said, no, some of the most accomplished and distinguished universities and researchers in this country and subject matter experts who have said, yes, there is an issue with private prisons, and here's what it is. Yes, there's an issue with
there's an issue with private prisons. Yes,
private prisons, exactly, and there's an issue with the disparity in bank loans in these financial institutions. Yes. So all of them that come and they wave their diversity flag and they put up their Black History Month posters, but they're still the ones not giving loans at the same equal rate to Blacks. So I wanted to provide those facts, those research, those subject matter experts saying, not just my opinion, but these are unbiased, researched, factual-based information that then, so the poetry speaks to your emotion and your spiritual sense of being, but then the narratives speak to your intellectual knowledge. So trying to put both together, the spiritual and the intellectual, to say, well, this book is touching on both of those points. And then, now let's have a dialogue about it.
So we've got a few minutes left. So I want to talk a little bit about your other books. Okay. But I say he has an amazing list of books that he's written. I don't get you at all. The Angel Chronicles.
Yeah.
So how did you get started in that, and how often do you update the scenes or scenarios?
Yeah, that was that really is a labor of love and passion, and that book, that series, right? Because right now it's 5-volume series, and I'll be working on volume 6 this year. So a little bit of a teaser there. But I started that series. I was with my younger son, and we were looking at some high school. My old high school papers that I used to write in, and I wrote a story back then called Lanze Angel. So it was just about me and my high school friends, and they were all different characters in the story. And Lanze Angel was kind of a cut up in class, and he was going to get kicked out of heaven. And so he had to go down to earth, and he had to do something really impactful for someone's life in order to earn his wings. So that was a story that was very popular when I was in high school. My son read it, and he was very, taken by it. And then I said, you know what, it's been many years since I wrote that story. I said, maybe I'm going to update it. So I started to update it. And as I started to write it, and I wrote maybe 1 or 2 sentences, I realized that was a story I wrote as a high school sophomore, junior, and senior. I said, but I've lived so much more today, and I know so much more about life and about faith and about spirituality. I can't write the same book today as a grown man as I would as a high school student. So I put the book down, and I went and I researched angels. I researched different concepts and scenes in the Bible. And some of it I knew just from my own, upbringing and my own exposure to, to my own church. So, I researched this thing for almost 2 years. And then I said, okay, now I've got the story that I want to tell. And the story I want to tell is really the history of the world, but told from the perspective of the angels, starting with the first sin in heaven. So the first sin in creation wasn't the fall of Adam and Eve, but it was the fall of Lucifer being expelled from heaven. Almost a third of the angels who followed him to lusted after the Holy Father's throne. And so I opened the book, I opened the series with the battle for heaven, which I talk about creation and the hierarchy of the angels and the archangels and those who were very obedient and those who started to feel frustrated that they didn't like their place in where they're sitting in creation, and they believed that they wanted more and they had ambition and envy, and that was the first sin. And so it's told by, so it's really an action-packed adventure. Think of it as Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings, that kind of action-packed kind of a series. So it's fiction-based, but underlying it is real events. So I couldn't make someone who we know and we love for example, Emmanuel, who comes down to earth and his earthly name is Jesus Christ. I couldn't make him be a bad character when we know the history of the world that he's our savior. So I had to stay true to kind of the foundation, kind of the religious foundation and structure. But within that, I took leeway in terms of the fiction of the interaction and the stories and how they went about, so the whole thing is about good versus evil. So volume 1 is the fall of the angels from heaven, but then volume 2 is the battle for man. So at the same time, with the creation of man, which was God's great prize and great satisfaction that he took, Lucifer realizes that, and he says, well, my revenge against God is to corrupt man, who I know you love and care about. So I'm going to deceive man into turning away from you. So now volume 2 picks up with the whole deception of moving man away from God, and then God's response to that by sending down from heaven the guardian angels to kind of guide man into staying on a righteous path and reminding them who their creator is and what their value is in this world. So then it continues on with other series, but that's the genesis of it. And so I've gotten so much feedback on this book, or I should say on the series, from people from around the world, and so it's available on Amazon, so people are able to download this from many parts of the world. And I've gotten feedback from my mother, who was contacting me, telling me that she could not get her son to read the Bible, and she could not get her son to go to church or to go to Bible school. But he picked up this book, and he is just fascinated by it, and he's now quoting to her things that are happening in the angels, telling her that this is what Lucifer did, and Lucifer's a bad guy. And she's just amazed at his interest now, and from that his curiosity peaked, where he is now, back at the time, this was several years ago, but back at the time he was now starting to also read the Bible, because he wanted to see these characters in more detail. Cool. So this got him interested in a fictional way, but then he wanted to also, that piqued his interest and curiosity to now learn more about these events and these people. So that's the power of this.
So that we don't forget, I don't want to run out of time. So it's available on Amazon. What about Black Wounds? Where can the listeners and viewers get a copy of Black Wounds?
Yeah, so all of these books are available on Amazon, and they're all available in e-format, so you can download them for electronically, as well as paperback. And it's funny because I started out with just e-format, but then my reader said I want to have a copy in my hand where I could touch and read, especially with the Angel Chronicles, because it's really got some great illustrations and pictures in it. So it kind of reads as a movie. That's what many people said. It felt like I was reading a movie, watching a movie, reading this book. So that's the power of the word and the pictures together, really opening up your imagination and telling this story. So all of them are available on Amazon. And as you said, if you go on, you put my name in, it'll bring you to my author page, and it'll show you the whole collection of all the different works that I've worked on, including the one that I wrote before Black Wounds, which is My Walk Through the Valley of the Shadow of Death. And that was inspired by my own personal health battle, and really leaning on my faith to realize that we're put here for a purpose, we're put here for a reason, and we may go through our own personal tribulations, but you have to maintain your faith, your belief, and your strength in God. So he's gotten me through this. So and we all have our own personal walks through the valley, whatever that is, whether it be something health-wise or financial or relationship-wise. So whatever that is, that your walk, this book kind of talks about maintaining your faith, maintaining your belief, looking towards that source of spiritual strength to help you get through it, and just maintaining your positive attitude. And one of the poems in this book talks about, I can't put more years in my life. We don't control that, only God controls that. But what I can do is put more life in my years that I have. So making sure you're just living your life to the fullest. You're not taking anything for granted. You're not putting things off that I'll do that next year or 2 years from now. If it's something that's important to you and it's going to make people around you happy and make you happy, then make it a priority and do it now while you have the time, while you have opportunity.
Well, I want to thank you very much for being my guest tonight. We are out of time. And you just gave me an idea for another show, Walk Through the Valley of Death, because I know a lot of us have had near-death experiences, whether it was fine, and if it was financial, let me tell you, it felt like hell in a hallway, okay?
Right.
And that would be a great show to talk about, to give some people some ideas about how you maintain, how you stay focused on, and not focused on living and not focused on what was falling apart around you.
Right.
So I want to thank you again. I also want to thank our sponsor, which I did not do at the beginning of the show, so I apologize, but Resource Industrial Supply and Equipment has been a faithful sponsor for me. When you need a supply company to rise to your needs, call Resource Industrial Supply and Equipment. So thank you all for listening. Thank you, Dr. Thompson, for joining me tonight. And with that, I will say, as I always say, I want you to do not go gently into that good night. I want you to find a heel worth dying, and I want you to take it. Be the person that you have been waiting for, and make today so awesome that yesterday gets jealous. May this day unfold and offer you just what you need with each unfolding moment. I'm Stephanie Wilson-Coleman, and remember, life is too short to drink cheap champagne. You guys have a great evening. Have a fantastic life, and remember that you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So start taking some shots on yourself. Bye now.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Wilson-Coleman, the Empowerment Doctor, and I'm here today with the fourth tip for taking control of your finances. We are going to look at ways to increasing your income. Start to sell some assets that you don't need or rarely use. Consider taking a part-time job, even if it's on a temporary basis or a seasonal basis. Look at ways to turn your hobbies into secondary sources of income. I know most of you have some fantastic hobbies that could make you some great income. And then create multiple lines of passive income streams. Give one of these or all of these a try, and I'm sure you'll be successful in increasing your income. This is Stephanie Wilson-Coleman, the Empowerment Doctor, and as I always say, life is too short to drink cheap champagne. Bye now.
But life's too short to drink cheap champagne, so I decided to buy me a better brand